You spend enough time on these roads, the ones that stitch America together with gray asphalt and yellow lines, and you start to believe in ghosts. Not the spooky kind in white sheets, but ghosts of a different sort. The ghosts of a tune on a dead radio station, the ghost of a shadow that looks a little too much like a man on the shoulder, the ghost of a choice you should have made 1,000 miles back. The road has a long memory. My rig, she's been my only real home for 15 years. The smell of worn leather, stale coffee, and diesels is more familiar to me than my own mother's kitchen ever was. The rumble of her engine's the only lullaby that works. I've crossed every state line, seen every sunrise over every mountain range this country has to offer, and I've heard the stories. Driver's talk. Over the crackle of a CB radio in the dead of night, and the greasy spoons at truck stops where the coffee is burnt and the waitresses are tired, we trade tales. We talk about phantom headlights that follow you for 100 miles, then vanish. About stretches of highway where time seems to bend. Most of them are just that, stories to keep the eyelids from getting heavy.
But there's one story they only tell when the hour's late and the room is quiet. A story about Iowa. Most people think of Iowa as flat, boring, an ocean of corn you have to swim through to get somewhere else. But truck is no better. We know that when the night gets deep and the fog rolls in off those fields, Iowa gets strange. The fog there isn't normal. It doesn't just drift in. It rises up from the soil like a breath being held, thick and wet and silent. It swallows sound, it swallows life, and sometimes it swallows people. The old-timers call it the Cornfield Carnival, or sometimes the Fog Fair. The story goes like this. You're on a long, straight shot, maybe Route 30, or a lonely County 2-lane. It's well after midnight. The fog is so thick, you can't see the nose of your own truck. Your world is just the twin beams of your headlights, cutting the tunnel through a wall of white. You're tired, your eyes are burning, and then you see it.
Off to the side, maybe a mile deep in the corn, you see lights. Not the steady, lonely light of a farmhouse. These are colored lights, a soft glow of reds and blues and yellows painting the underside of the fog. And if you're close enough, you might see the shape of a Ferris wheel, turning slow and silent, a giant metal skeleton against the gray. Then you hear the music, faint, tinny calliope music, like a memory from childhood drifting through the corn. Every driver who tells the story says the same thing. It's the most beautiful, inviting thing you've ever seen. A pocket of warmth and life in the middle of a cold, empty nowhere. And every driver ends the story with the same warning. You keep your eyes on the road. You put your foot down on the gas. You do not, under any circumstances, stop. You do not look for a turnoff, because that carnival, it isn't on any map. It comes with the fog, and it's looking for company. I always thought it was just another story, a good one, sure, the kind that gives you a little jolt of adrenaline to get you to the next stop. I never thought I'd see it myself, but the road has a long memory, and it's got a funny way of showing you the things you don't believe in.
It was a late August run, hauling a load of machine parts from Chicago to Omaha. As I crossed the Mississippi into Iowa, the sun was setting. On the horizon, I could see a bank of low, gray clouds. By the time night fell proper, the fog had come. It started thin, like smoke. Within an hour, it was like driving through milk. I had my high beams on, but they were useless. I slowed her down to a crawl, knuckles white on the steering wheel. This was the kind of fog the old-timers warned you about. I was maybe 100 miles east of Des Moines on a stretch of highway so straight and dark you could forget the rest of the world existed. The loneliness started to creep in, that special kind of deep-in-your-bones lonely that only a trucker knows at 2 a.m. And that's when I saw them. To my right,
Out in the blackness, where should have been nothing but corn, there were lights. A soft, hazy bloom of color in the fog. My first thought was a town, but I knew this route. There was nothing out here for 50 miles. These were festive. Pinks and greens and golds swirling together like oil on water.
My heart started to beat a little faster. The stories came rushing back, uninvited. Keep your eyes on the road. Put your foot down. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't stop myself from glancing over. As my rig rolled forward, the lights became clearer. Through a momentary thin patch in the fog, I saw a shape, unmistakable. A giant wheel, outlined in soft, white bulbs, turning in a slow, majestic circle. My breath caught in my throat. It was real. Then I heard it. I killed the radio, cracked my window just an inch. The cold, wet air rushed in, and with it came the sound. Faint, so faint I thought I was imagining it. The cheerful, out-of-tune melody of a calliope, playing a song I almost recognized. It was the saddest, most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It sounded like lost laughter. Every instinct, every story I'd ever been told was screaming at me to floor it, but I was frozen. The lights were a beacon in the oppressive dark. It felt welcoming. It felt like an answer to that bone-deep loneliness. For a long, terrifying moment, I understood why someone might turn. I shook my head hard. "Nope," I said out loud to my empty cab. I closed the window, cranked the radio, and I focused on the yellow line. I just drove. But for the rest of the night, I could swear I still heard that music chasing me through the fog.
You don't see something like that and just forget it. For the next month, it was all I could think about. I tried to bring it up once with another driver, a guy named Sal I'd known for years. "Ever hear any of those stories about Iowa?" I asked. "About a carnival in the fog?" Sal stopped stirring his coffee. His face went pale. He just shook his head slowly. "Some roads you don't go down, friend," he said. And that was the end of the conversation. His fear told me more than any story could. This wasn't just a tall tale. A couple of months passed. The memory began to fade. Then I got a priority load. Electronics from Joliet to Council Bluffs. It meant taking that same route through central Iowa, and it meant driving through the night. I told myself it would be fine, but as I crossed into Iowa, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The air grew heavy, and just like before, as dusk settled, the fog began to rise from the earth. This time, I was ready for it, so I thought. I kept my eyes glued to the road. I wouldn't look, I wouldn't listen. But the carnival found me anyway.
I was on the exact same stretch of highway. I could just feel it, a change in the air. And there it was, to my right. This time it was closer, much closer. I could see it all. The Ferris wheel, the bright lights of a midway, the silhouette of a carousel. I could see the tents, striped in red and white, glowing from within. And the music. It wasn't faint this time. It was clear, a cheerful, rollicking tune that wrapped around the cab of my truck, pulling me in. I saw something else, too. People, just tiny silhouettes against the lights. Figures walking along the midway, maybe even a child holding a balloon. A sense of life, of joy radiated from it. The loneliness of the road, the thousands of miles spent with only my own thoughts for company, it all hit me at once. What was I so afraid of? It was probably just some local fair. I saw a break in the guardrail ahead, a small dirt track leading off the highway and into the corn, towards the lights. Just a quick look, a voice in my head whispered, "What's the harm in that?" Against every rational thought, against every whispered warning, I slowed my rig. I flicked on my turn signal. I turned the wheel and the big tires of my truck crunched onto the soft dirt of the track. I was leaving the highway.
I was going to the carnival.
The moment my wheels left the pavement, everything changed. It was instant. The fog became a solid wall. It pressed in on the cab from all sides, so dense that my headlights were swallowed just a few feet from the grill. And the carnival, the beautiful, warm, inviting carnival, vanished. The colored lights were gone, snuffed out. The cheerful calliope music cut off mid-note, plunging me into a silence that was more terrifying than any scream. All I could hear was the low grumble of my own engine and the frantic pounding of my heart. Panic seized me. I slammed on the brakes. I just turned around. I put the truck in reverse. I looked in my mirrors, but they reflected nothing but the same impenetrable white fog. I tried to back up slowly, but there was no truck. My tires spun in soft earth. I got out of the cab, leaving the engine running. I took a step away from the truck and was immediately surrounded. Corn stalks, taller than I was, brushed against my face. I wasn't on a track. I was in the middle of a field.
"Hello?" I yelled, my voice sounding small and weak. The fog and the corn just ate the sound. I tried to walk back to the highway. I kept one hand on the side of my trailer and shuffled forward. When I reached the front of the cab, there was nothing. No track. Just more corn. The highway should have been right there. I started to walk in a circle around my truck, pushing through the thick, leafy stalks. They felt like hands grabbing at my clothes. The rustling sound they made was the only noise in the universe. It sounded like whispering. I did a full circle, then another. There was nothing. No road, no carnival. Just my rig, sitting impossibly in the middle of a cornfield, trapped in a sea of fog. It was as if the highway and the entire world with it had simply disappeared. I scrambled back into the cab and locked the doors. I laid on the horn, blasting a desperate, deafening sound into the night, but the sound felt choked. I was yelling into a pillow. I sat there, trembling. The welcoming lights were a lie. The happy music was a trap. There was no carnival. There was only the fog, the corn, and the crushing, absolute certainty that I was not alone. The whispers of the cornstalks continued all night long, and I just sat there, waiting for the sun.
I don't think I slept. I just sat there, rigid, staring into the white nothingness. Every rustle of the corn was a footstep. Every drop of condensation on the windshield was a finger tracing a line on the glass. Then, slowly, the world outside began to take on a shape. The oppressive white started to thin out. The sun was coming up. The fog was burning away. As the light grew, the cornfield was revealed. And the truth was somehow more impossible than the night had been. My rig was sitting in the dead center of a vast cornfield. Not near the edge. I was a good half-mile from the highway, and all around me, the corn was perfect, unbroken. There were no tracks leading from the road to my truck. No flattened stalks, no muddy ruts. It was as if my truck had been picked up and gently placed in the middle of the field. There was no physical way I could have driven here. My legs were shaking as I climbed out of the cab. I walked around the rig. Nothing, not a single sign of passage.
My phone miraculously had a signal. The first call was to my dispatcher. The second was to a local heavy-duty towing company. An old man named Earl showed up a couple of hours later. He took one long look at my truck, then at the highway, then back at my truck. He didn't ask how I got there. He just spat and shook his head. "I'm gonna cuss you extra," was all he said. As his crew worked for hours, the county sheriff pulled up. He was a young guy. I lied. I said I must have fallen asleep at the wheel. He wrote it down, but he didn't look at me. He looked at the field. "You're lucky," he said, his voice low. "Last time this happened, about 10 years ago, We just found the truck. The driver was gone. He tipped his hat and left. The farmer who owned the field came out too. He was angry about the corn, but as he looked at where my truck was, a look of fear crossed his face. Everyone out here knew. They just didn't talk about it. I never took that route through Iowa again. I'll add 1,000 miles to a trip to avoid it, because I know what I saw. I accepted an invitation that wasn't meant for me, and I was one of the lucky ones. So if you're ever out there and the fog rolls in, if you see a string of pretty lights and hear a happy tune, you listen to the old stories. You keep your hands on the wheel and your eyes on that yellow line, because some things that get lost in the fog are never found. And that carnival, it's always there, waiting patiently for the next tired and lonely soul to make a wrong turn.